of changing the way people see. And if you can change the way people see, then you can have a different kind of conversation. It's obviously an incredibly cliche thing to say, right? Like, but there's a reason that cliches exist. So there's a million of them, right? Seeing is believing, and a picture's worth 1,000 words, and all of those things are, I think, embedded in this fundamentally true, this fundamentally true thing, which is that, the encounter with an art object is unlike anything else. And so wouldn't it be interesting to give all of these artists this platform, this prompt, and to then present it in aggregate, and see what comes of it. So I don't know if that's exactly the response, but
no, it's
something
great.
like that.
In episode 11, I spoke to another artist that is focused on representation and social change. Vincent-Valdez's work holds a mirror up to America and asks for answers. In this clip, Valdez talks about his massive 2015 painting, The City.
So The City, I began in the summer of 2015. It took me approximately 365 days to complete. I never had encountered before a subject or a work in the studio that began unfolding in real life outside of the studio doors while I was creating it. And so I would be in the studio working on this 40-foot painting of a night scene with a huddled group of hooded Klan members, men, women, and child, on an obscured hillside overlooking the city, right? And the city became the title of the piece. The city became this larger than life symbol for me. It became the epitome of what this piece represented, that this could be any city in America, that as again, as artist, as citizen, as a person of color from a community of color, for far too long, it couldn't be more clear to me that America has convinced itself, well, that a scene like this was relegated and isolated to those kinds of people in those kinds of places, far away from the rest of us, because that's not really who we are. And this was my creating a scene like the city, actually contradicted that notion. It was my attempt to say, shame on you, America, for being so eager to call yourself a post-racial society on the heels of your first Black president. Because what I was seeing was a much different picture in 21st century America. I was never interested in the agency or the presence or the organization, the history of the Ku Klux Klan. That had nothing to do with it, really. I merely used it as a symbol for a much bigger threat, which is white supremacy in this country and the power structures of white supremacy. And so the beauty and the truth, as always, for me, is hidden in the details. So when I'm more concerned with the hidden symbols that most of us as Americans living and working in 21st century America don't even really realize. We're not conditioned in this country to inform ourselves enough to be aware of what really is at play in daily America, right? When you think about the powerful symbols of advertising, iconography in this country, and how they almost always lead back to the fundamentals of nationalism and patriotism that in turn can become agents for racism, discrimination, sexism, and so forth. So there's floating around in that canvas these hidden symbols, like you mentioned Charlottesville. Mm-hmm. Every time I think about being recently completed with that painting and then watching the scenes of Charlottesville occurring, and then all these other scenes that began erupting around the country, And over, I quickly began to recognize that there was one symbol that just stuck with me, and it was the symbolism of these trucks that were being
Yeah.
used as symbols of aggression, right?
Right.
And so when I devise the composition of the city, there's one light source,
Yeah.
one main light source. Almost it creates a chiaroscuro like effect, and it's the headlamps of this brand new souped up Chevrolet truck, right? This becomes
Heartbeat
the
of
idea.
America. It was a heartbeat of America was their tagline back
There
then.
there you go. So I compositionally, as a compositional strategy, I made damn sure that cross, right, it becomes like equated with like the burning cross, of the Ku Klux Klan, this symbol of the past, a symbol of terror, and how that can quietly be viewed in very, very different manners depending on who you are and where you are in America. And so that slogan, the heartbeat of America,
Right.
became everything for me. The baby Nike Air Jordans that are laced on the feet of the toddler who's in a Ku Klux Klan hood, who's pointing at you like Uncle Sam, I want you. Here's the next generation that is learning these methods and these ways that have been passed down for generations and centuries in this country. There is the metropolitan city down below, and if you follow the traces in the mud and the tire tracks and the footprints, they lead you down like a golden brick road from Wizard of Oz down into the Golden City. It could be anywhere in America. And what does that tell the viewer? It suggests that these aren't people that are, again, isolated into these, forgotten communities. They're in your classrooms tomorrow morning. They're in the courthouses. They're in the medical systems. They're in the police force. They are part of. We are all part of this community, and the idea that these forces exist in the shadows, right, and out in the open, more than we like to admit, is a very real concern and threat in this country. And so this was my way of confronting the elephant in the American living room.
2021 is destined to be known for year 2 of the global pandemic and the rise of NFTs. The market for NFTs skyrocketed over the course of the year, and I was able to bring you conversations with some of the most knowledgeable and influential voices in the industry. In March, Beeple's first 5,000 days sold for $69 million through an auction at Christie's. Over the course of the year, I spoke to the auction house executive that brokered the deal, as well as the person who paid the $69 million to acquire the work. Crypto artists like Sarah Zucker, Robness and Jen Stark provided the artist's perspective, while Colborn Bell explained what motivated him to create the Museum of Crypto Art. There was one question that I asked each guest from the space: what's in store for the future of NFTs, and what hurdles stand in the way? It's interesting to hear the different perspectives. First up is Noah Davis, head of digital sales at Christie's.
I have no idea, my friend. I get this question obviously constantly, and I just like to say I don't have a crystal ball. If anything, I have a snow globe, and all I do is pick it up and shake it around. So that's what I can promise you, is that it will always be chaotic, and it will always be unpredictable. So if anybody tries to tell you what the marketplace is going to look like in 6 months, or even a couple weeks, I would be deeply skeptical of that person.
Right.
But what I can say is the reason why this is all super unpredictable is for a few reasons. I think it's this equation. I think about this all the time. For the people who are driving this marketplace, the collectors and the artists, people who have been really immersed in this stuff for a while, for them, the future does not exist. The future is an abstract concept that is completely irrelevant for them, because the future is now, essentially, right? It's grandiose, but it's true. Like, people in the space think about the future as something that they're bringing into reality in media res. So when the future is now and the art doesn't exist and the money doesn't exist, quote unquote exist, When that's the equation, there's no way to predict what the outcome is. It's just impossible. So, but that's also what I find so rewarding and fascinating and stimulating about the space is that unpredictability and that chaos. So I guess it takes a certain type to really enjoy it.
Next, we'll hear the perspective of Jason Bailey, a well-respected technologist who has been in the space for years.
Sure, yeah. So I always tell people that I'm really bullish on digital ownership and the ownership of digital goods and digital property. So look, I think eventually, even though I love collecting NFTs and have been collecting them since before they were called NFTs, it's the nature of anything popular that eventually people are going to get tired of the word NFT. And, maybe this trend, a year, 4 years, a decade out kind of runs its course. But I don't think the trend of people wanting to own digital things ever goes away. It only goes up from here, in my opinion, right? We've seen it increase over the last several decades, and I think there's no reason to think that it won't only increase moving forward, right? So I'm very bullish on the idea that, people are going to want increasingly to own things digitally as sort of our existence increasingly goes online and it becomes less physical. So I think the things that could get in the way of that happening, or the things that need to be laid in place, are today so much of the focus on NFTs has been around buying and selling. So it's all about, if I buy this, can I flip it? Can I sell that? Can I buy this? How much is my collection worth? But we've kind of raced ahead of the infrastructure. So there's still a lot of non-buying and selling oriented infrastructure stuff that has to be built and put into place.
Museum of Crypto Art founder Colborn Bell provided his insight in episode 14.
I'll be brutally honest. I think like a cataclysmic supply shock, right? I think it's a lot easier for artists to hear the storylines, to think, they're entering a world paved with gold, to think, that if they take the time to learn the systems and, mint whatever their, creation is from Cinema 4D, that they, will receive like the recognition. That I think it's all a bit of a misnomer. I haven't particularly seen the collector pool growing at the same pace. And, it's just not, in my mind, particularly sustainable at the moment. I think we've seen like a rapid de-evolution of the culture, whereas there was kind of like a focus on one-of-one art pieces. It's all very much devolved into, 10K PFP projects, lower price points, open editions, rampant speculation, and kind of what I identify as people trying to pick up, pennies in front of a steamroller, where they'll buy something for $1,000 and try and sell it for $1,100 and realize there's just no liquidity in the market.
Anne Bracegirdle founded the Art and Tech Initiative at Christie's before moving on to the NFT design studio and consultancy Metaversal. She weighed in on episode 22.
I think there needs to be a lot of education on both sides. And by both sides, I mean the traditional art world and the NFT community. I think there's still a lack of understanding from both sides of the most beautiful and exciting elements of the other. As I mentioned earlier, many people within the legacy art world just see these massive sales and have no idea why they should just be excited by a Bored Ape, for instance. And they're thinking of it in the traditional sense of just purely aesthetically, without understanding the collective nature of the project, the utility aspects of the tokens, right? I think there's still such a lack of understanding of the utility of NFTs and the potential to engage and reward and incentivize your collector base, who also then defines the future of the project, right? It's that nature of active collective ownership that I think there's still a lack of understanding of that. And I think, on a very basic level, the traditional art world has never existed on Twitter. Going back to Constitution DAO, Brooke Lampley, who was the ultimate winner of the Constitution, the specialist at Sotheby's, she just made a Twitter account last week to engage with with all of the
hype that was sort of on Twitter about her. So